At my daughter's wedding, my son-in-law called me to help. Not to my face at first. He said it into a microphone. "Let's raise a glass," Ryan Miller announced, smiling that polished smile of his. "To my father-in-law, Daniel Brooks, the man who can fix anything with a hammer, even when it's better off replaced." Laughter burst across the ballroom. Not from everyone, just enough people to make it sting. I sat there in my gray suit, the one I'd worn to church for a decade, staring at the bubbles in my water glass. The room smelled like champagne and money. Every man in there wore a suit that cost more than my truck. Every woman smiled too long, too bright, like they were auditioning for approval. Ryan lifted his glass again. "You know," he said, grinning, "they say when you marry a woman, you marry her family. So I guess I'm officially part of the handyman union." The laughter got louder this time. Confident, comfortable laughter. I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't smile. Because the building he worked in, the one with his firm's name carved in glass on the 31st floor, that building belonged to me. I owned it. And I owned the silence that came after his joke, too. He didn't know that the man sitting at the edge of the table, the one he just mocked, signed his company's lease every 3 years. So I stayed quiet. But my quiet has never meant weak. It means I'm waiting. And that night, Ryan Miller was about to learn what happens when a man mistakes silence for submission. He didn't see it, but I'd been watching him for 2 years. Every dinner, every holiday, every moment he found a way to remind me I didn't fit into his world. He did it with smiles, not words. Those careful, polished smiles that always landed like small insults. The first time Emily brought him home, he looked around my living room like it was a museum of things people used to own. I'd worked 40 years with my hands, framing houses, fixing roofs, laying tile in the Texas heat. Work that leaves you with cracked knuckles and a back that hurts when the weather changes. Work that gives you everything real in life. But Ryan only saw what money could polish. He came from a family of loud success. His father was a lawyer, his mother a surgeon. They carried pride like a surname. And from the first handshake, I knew what he saw when he looked at me, someone beneath the glass floor his world stood on. So I let him believe it. Because every man deserves a chance to show who he really is. And Ryan did, piece by piece. He'd roll his eyes when I talked about a new house I was building for rent. He'd correct me at dinner when I said cement instead of concrete. He'd pat my shoulder when guests were around and say, "Don't worry, Dan here's a simple guy, but salt of the earth." I'd smile and nod, because the loudest men always reveal the most when they think you're not listening. Emily tried to smooth things over, but I could feel her pulling away little by little. She stopped bringing him around as much. She stopped mentioning my business. She'd tell me things like, "Dad, Ryan's colleagues are coming for dinner. Maybe wear something a bit neater." I wore the same gray shirt anyway. I wasn't hiding from anyone. I just never cared to be seen. That's the thing people like Ryan never learn. Some of us don't need to be noticed to be powerful. That night, under those chandeliers, he finally crossed the line between arrogance and ignorance. And I was done letting him talk. The ballroom, anyway, that slow scrape of wood on marble that makes people turn before they realize why. 200 eyes followed me as I reached for my glass of water. My reflection shimmered inside it, steady, calm, older than I remembered. Ryan blinked, half drunk, half proud. "Hey, Pops, you good?" I smiled. "Fine." Then I stepped toward him. The band stopped pretending to tune their instruments. The servers froze mid-step. Even the chandeliers seemed to hum lower. "I just wanted to say something," I said, my voice even. "A small thing." Ryan grinned. "Sure, let's hear it." "The mic's yours, old man." He passed me the microphone like he was doing me a favor. I took it gently, like I was holding a nail before the first hammer swing. "I've been fixing things all my life," I said. "Houses, cars, fences, roofs. But the hardest thing to fix," I looked right at him, "is a man's perception." A soft murmur rolled through the crowd. "You see," I continued, "I don't wear expensive suits. I don't drive new cars. And I don't talk much about my work. Because I learned a long time ago that when you spend your life building things, you don't need to explain yourself. The work speaks. Ryan chuckled under his breath, but the sound cracked halfway through. Patricia Green, his boss, had her phone in her hand. She wasn't smiling. She was studying me like she was trying to place my face. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small white business card. I turned it between my fingers, then set it on the table in front of Ryan. He looked down, still smirking, until he read the name. Daniel Brooks, CEO, Brooks Property Group. His smile stopped. I watched his throat tighten. Patricia suddenly sat up straighter. Brooks Property Group, she said quietly. We rent from them. You could feel the air shift. Ryan's face paled. That's your company? I nodded once. Has been for 28 years. The silence that followed was heavy. The kind that presses down on a man until he either apologizes or breaks. Ryan didn't apologize. He stuttered. You're saying you own the building our firm. Suite 3100, right? I said. 31st floor, glass lobby, polished granite. You pay about $84 a square foot. Rent's due the first of every month. Gasps. Chairs turned. Patricia's mouth opened slightly. You've been working for me for 2 years, I said. And you never even looked up to notice whose name was on the lease. Ryan stared at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. That's impossible, he muttered. I smiled again. The same small, patient smile I'd worn the first time he insulted me. Son, I said quietly, nothing's impossible. Some of us just build slower, quieter, and with better foundation. Ryan's eyes darted toward Patricia as if she might rescue him. She didn't. Instead, she leaned forward, calm and professional. Mr. Brooks, she said, if I'm not mistaken, our firm signed a 10-year lease with Brooks Property Group back in 2020. That's right, I said. And if I'm not mistaken, your tenant representative was a young man named Ryan Miller. Her eyes moved from me to him, sharp as glass. He was. The room shifted again. Some guests tried to pretend they weren't listening, but you could feel the weight of every glance on Ryan's shoulders. His jaw tightened. He forced a laugh. Okay, good one. Great story. You print a business card, throw out a few rent numbers. Patricia pulled out her phone. Our lease has the owner's signature on it. She scrolled, then stopped. Her voice dropped. Daniel Brooks. Signed March 2nd, 2020. The color drained from Ryan's face completely. I took the mic back from the table. I told you I fix things, I said. What you didn't know is that I've been fixing roofs on buildings I own. I never needed to brag about it, because real work doesn't shout. The crowd was silent. You could hear the buzz of the air conditioning and the faint clinking of a fork somewhere in the back. Ryan tried to steady himself, but his voice cracked. You could have told us. You could have. Told you what? I interrupted. That I didn't need your approval? That the man you called to help signed your paycheck every month? Emily was crying quietly beside my seat. Her mascara streaked, but her eyes were steady, finally seeing things clearly. Patricia stood. Mr. Brooks, she said, I want to apologize on behalf of our company. If I'd known. No need, I cut in gently. I don't hold grudges. I just believe people should see the value in others before it costs them something. Ryan's hand trembled around his glass. He muttered something I couldn't catch. Then, louder, this doesn't change anything. I turned toward him. It changes everything. He looked small now, smaller than I'd ever seen him. You married my daughter, Ryan, I said quietly. And instead of building with her, you built yourself up by stepping on her family. That's not partnership. That's pride. And pride always collapses faster than any building I've ever seen. I placed the microphone down, looked at Emily once more, and said softly, Come on, sweetheart. Let's go home. We walked out to the sound of chairs scraping and whispers chasing behind us. Outside, the air was warm, still smelling faintly of rain. Emily gripped my arm. Dad? She whispered. I didn't know. I know, I said. Now you do. And behind us, in that glittering ballroom, Ryan Miller's perfect world began to crack. The next morning, I woke to sunlight spilling through the blinds and the hum of my old coffee maker in the kitchen. Emily was sitting at the table, her wedding dress folded into a small heap beside her like it was something she wanted to forget existed. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying anymore. She looked up at me. "He called last night," she said softly. "Twice." I nodded. "And?" I didn't answer. She paused, voice tight. "He said I embarrassed him." I poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of her. "He embarrassed himself," I said. All I did was turn on the light. For a long moment, we just sat there in the stillness, the smell of coffee filling the room. She finally asked the question that had been hanging in the air since last night. "Why didn't you ever tell me, Dad? About the company, the buildings, everything." I took a slow breath. "Because I didn't build any of it for people to talk about," I said. "I built it so you'd never have to depend on anyone's approval. Your mother used to say." Emily's lips trembled. "That real strength doesn't need to be loud." I smiled faintly. "You remember." The day moved quietly. My phone buzzed nonstop. News outlets, business calls, messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Someone had filmed the whole scene at the wedding. It was already online. By noon, there were headlines floating around the internet. "Quiet landlord humiliates arrogant banker at daughter's wedding." I didn't read the comments. I didn't need to. I knew how people loved stories that made them feel justice had been served. But for me, it wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. By evening, Patricia Green called. Her voice was steady, professional, but there was a touch of disbelief in it. "Mr. Brooks, I wanted you to know we've suspended Ryan pending review. His conduct was, well, you saw it." "I did," I said. "I also wanted to thank you," she continued. "You reminded a few people in that room what respect actually looks like." That night, after Emily went to bed, I sat out on the porch with my coffee gone cold. The Texas night hummed with crickets and far-off traffic. I could see the glow of the city skyline miles away, the same skyline that had laughed at me once when I was young and broke. Now, it was built on ground I owned. And yet, all I felt was quiet. That kind of quiet that comes when the storm's passed, and what's left standing are the things built to last. 2 days later, the story had spread far beyond Dallas. By then, I'd stopped answering calls altogether. A local radio host called it the most satisfying moment on the internet this week. Another headline read, "Billionaire carpenter shuts down arrogant banker." I laughed at that one. I've never liked the word billionaire. It sounds like bragging, and I never did any of this to brag. But Ryan Miller, he didn't find any of it funny. Patricia called again that Thursday morning. "Mr. Brooks, he's been terminated," she said. "Officially. Conduct unbecoming. Violation of corporate ethics." I'm sorry it came to that. I told her not to be sorry. Some lessons can't be learned in comfort. That afternoon, a black car stopped in front of my house. Emily was out, so I opened the door myself. Ryan stepped out. He wasn't wearing a suit this time. His tie was gone, shirt half untucked, eyes sunken like he hadn't slept. He stood on my porch, hands shaking slightly. "Mr. Brooks, I need to talk." I said nothing, just stepped aside. He walked in, slowly, like the air inside the house was heavier than outside. "I lost everything," he said. "My job, my name, my reputation, everything. Do you feel good about that?" I looked at him for a moment before answering. "You lost what you built on sand," I said. "You never valued the ground beneath it." He swallowed hard. "I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I corrected. "You thought you were marrying down. You thought humility meant failure. That's your mistake, not mine." He looked around the living room, the same one he'd once laughed at. The photos, the chipped table, the old clock that still ticked unevenly. "You could have told me," he muttered. "And you could have treated me with respect before you found out who I was," I replied. He lowered his head, nodding slightly. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything." I studied him for a moment. "Apologies a start," I said. "But it's not for me. It's for her." He looked up. "Emily won't talk to me." "She will," I said, "when she's ready." He nodded again, turned toward the door, then stopped. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, You built something incredible. I smiled faintly. No, son. We did. The men who pour the concrete, swing the hammers, wire the lights. They built it with me. I just never forgot what it felt like to be one of them. He left without another word. When the door closed, the silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was honest. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the photo of my late wife on the mantel. Her smile was the same, calm, certain, knowing. You'd have liked that one, I said softly. Took him long enough to learn. Outside, the sun had started to set behind the rooftops, gold against the faint blue. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. A week later, Emily moved back into her old room. She came with a suitcase. No makeup, no explanations, just the quiet look of someone who had finally stopped pretending. I didn't ask questions. I made her favorite dinner, grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, and corn on the cob, the kind her mother used to make. She barely ate half her plate before the words came. I filed for divorce, she said. I nodded. Good. She looked up at me, eyes wet but steady. He said I made him look small. I leaned back in my chair. Sometimes a mirror does that. She laughed softly through her tears, the kind of laugh that sounded like release. That night, we sat on the porch again. The sky was dark, clear, and honest. No noise, no ballroom lights, just crickets and wind brushing against the trees. Dad, she said after a while, I was ashamed of where I came from. Can you believe that? Ashamed of you. I shook my head. You were never ashamed of me, Emily. You were just trying to belong in a world that doesn't know what real worth looks like. She stared at her hands. He made me think silence meant weakness. Silence isn't weakness, I said quietly. It's choice. And choice is power. When you know who you are, you don't have to prove it every 5 minutes. She nodded slowly, letting that sink in. Mom used to say that. She was right, I said. Still is. The following weeks passed quietly. She started working again, took over a communications project for one of my properties. Clients loved her. For the first time, she didn't hide her last name. She carried it. The internet kept spinning its story about the handyman billionaire, but it stopped feeling like mine. It became a parable people used to make themselves feel better. That was fine. The world can have the story. I already had the lesson. 1 year later, Emily met someone new, a software engineer named David Lawson. When she brought him over, I saw something different in her. She was calm, sure, and completely herself. David shook my hand firmly and said, Sir, I've heard a lot about you. And for the record, I don't believe half of what the internet says. I'd rather hear it from you. That made me laugh for the first time in months. Good, I said. The truth always sounds better when it's told quietly. They married the next spring. Smaller wedding this time. 80 guests. No champagne speeches, no rented pride, just joy. When it was my turn to speak, I took the mic, looked at my daughter, then at her husband, and said, Humility isn't weakness. It's the foundation proud men stand on without realizing it. Build your lives on it, and no storm will shake you. The applause was warm and real. After the ceremony, David came up to me and said, I want to be the kind of man your daughter already knows how to believe in. That was the moment I knew everything had come full circle. Because the best revenge was never the humiliation. It was seeing my daughter finally understand her worth, and knowing she'd never again let anyone make her doubt it. I looked at her and smiled. You finally learned what your mother and I always wanted you to know. She smiled back. That quiet doesn't mean weak. I nodded. That quiet means strong. And for the first time since that night in the ballroom, I didn't feel the weight of silence. I felt its power. Please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification for more stories like this. Tell us where you are watching from. We would like to know.